Hi everyone, welcome to this impromptu edition of 21st Century Saints. Remember when we would podcast regularly on a Wednesday? Well, we decided we're going to keep you all on our toes and just podcast whenever we feel like it. So the girls are back in town tonight. We are joined live here in the studio. We have, of course, our wonderful Queen Elizabeth, Sarah Elizabeth Delaney. You want to say hey, Sarah?
Hi everyone. It's good to be with you all.
We're in the studio also with the incredible Carla Long. Do you want to say hey, Carla?
Hey, Carla. No, hey, everyone. It's so great. It's so great to be here.
She's sassy like us. We like this. And we also have Joelle Wight. Do you want to say hey?
Hi, everybody.
We're going to kick off what we're going to do tonight because it's a special episode. We haven't got to hang out as much with our cool cousins from Community of Christ nearly as often as we would like, and they're the cool kids, in this crazy restoration world. Lead by example, are really fun, are so well respected, and there are some things we wanted to talk about tonight, some particular things, because this is a really special time, especially here in the UK, I feel. So what we're going to do is just introduce who our guests are, and then we'll kick off the conversation. So Carla, could we start with you? Tell us a little bit about your bio, because to be blunt, most people in the UK, in the world of sort of broader, umbrella Mormonism, unless you're a member of Community of Christ, we don't really know what's going on. We don't know what leadership looks like. So could you give us a little bit of your bio and what brought you to this space at this time?
Absolutely. First of all, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So I have been a member of Community of Christ my whole life. My father's an elder. My mother's a priest. My sister's an elder. My mother was ordained when I was 7 years old. So I've never really known a life without women in ministry. Like, that has been my whole life, really since I can remember, which has been pretty awesome. I feel really, really blessed to be able to say that. I was a high school math teacher first, and then God started tapping me on the shoulder and called me into ministry. So since that, I only taught for 3 years. And since that happened, I've worked for Community of Christ for about 20 years now. I've worked on 4 continents for Community of Christ. I've lived on 3 of those continents, and I visited 6 continents. And most of those visits were for Community of Christ, but not all of them. One of them was on vacation. What can I say? Just recently, my job before my current job, I was a Latter-day Seeker minister in Utah. We lived there. My family and I lived there for about 6 years. I was the pastor of the Salt Lake City congregation, and the pastor of the Provo group, and the pastor of the Logan group. I was all over Utah. I drove thousands of miles a year going up and down the Wasatch Front, which was amazing. And I also learned a lot about being Latter-day Seekers and how difficult it is to change churches. Like, that's really, really hard. So now I am a counselor to the Presiding Bishop, Ron Harmon. So I'm in the Presiding Bishopric. I don't know if you want me to tell you a little bit about what we call the World Church Leadership Council. I'm a part of that as well, along with the First Presidency, the Council of 12 Apostles, the Presiding Bishopric, and then also the Director of Human Resources, Director of Spiritual Formation, the High Priest, Quorum Leader, the Presiding Evangelist, and there's probably 1 or 2 that I'm missing in there, but all of us make up the World Church Leadership Council. So we get together about 3 or 4 times a year, and we have discussions, and other than that, I'm just a part of the Presiding Bishopric. Kind of boring, really.
It is so the opposite of boring. And just so that I think for context for our audience too, because I'm super aware that we have an audience right across the whole spectrum, from Latter-day Saints to I know a lot of the Community of Christ gang are here with us and watching tonight. We love you guys, and there's a lot of people who have just never experienced this world at all. So we really are talking across a spectrum. So if there's anything that needs clarified, just drop it in the comments and we'll do that. But because Latter-day Saints tend to be very clear on structure, and this is what authority looks like. When someone in authority is there, we're even standing as they enter a room at a certain point, and it's very hard to keep a low profile. If you were in the presiding bishop, everyone would know. And so we at Sunstone Symposium, we in the UK, the first people that I met at Sunstone, and also just so happened that they're at Community of Christ, was Lachlan Mackay, who's been doing a lot of great work recently. And, people who are just, you guys have the audacity to be normal. And we're kind of like, how do you do this? And we were at a previous Sunstone a couple of, I think it was the year before last.
Oh.
We were doing a conversation with an apostle session, and everyone is sitting waiting for the apostle, whoever it is, to arrive. And it's Richard James, who's been coming to Sunstone forever and has had this fairly recent call, and and he's like, yeah, so that would be me. And it was so fascinating that most of the questions ended up being directed towards his wife and some of the women in Community of Christ, and it just became so fascinating. So yeah, you guys are just so chill. It's awesome. Joelle, would you share a little bit about your bio?
Yeah, so it's a little funny as I hear Carla share about herself. There are multiple things in our past that kind of line up with each other. So I also started out my career as a teacher. I taught fourth grade for a couple of years. But in my context, where I live in the United States, I was really bothered by a lot of the social injustices that I was seeing at the time. And so I left teaching and I went to get a master's in social work to try to kind of create some of that social change. Also, like Carla, I'm a lifelong member of Community of Christ. And so my background in that faith with this desire to create positive social change really kind of led me to be here today, because in Community of Christ, we do believe in trying to make the world better, try to live into God's preferred future. And so that is really what brings me to this work. Carla and I had a little bit of an overlap. COVID kind of interrupted, but we had a little bit of an overlap in Utah and just had a blast working together. Well, now I'm speaking for you, Carla. I assume you had as much fun as I did. I hope that that's true. Okay, good. If any of you are just listening to audio, Carla did just raise her hands to confirm. So I worked with Carla in Utah for a little bit, and now I'm out in the Washington, D.C. area, working as a mission center president and invitation minister out here. And then I also serve as a president of 70 on the Council of Presidents of 70. So Carla mentioned the World Church Leadership Council. One of the presidents of 70, the senior president of 70, serves on that. Oh, I didn't. Did you forget to say that one? I didn't even know. I was not calling you out, I swear. I was just making the president of 70 connection there. So one of the presidents of 70 serves on that council. But then kind of separate from that, we have the Council of Presidents of 70. There are 7 of us from all over the world, and we get together and like Carla said, have conversations and make decisions. So that's what brings me here today. That is what I am doing currently. But underlying all of that is just this desire for peace and justice, and for meeting injustices in the world with uncommon grace.
And one of the things that so you were over in the UK last year, right? Yeah, for Sunstone. And so we got to find out a little bit about you, and what one of the things that I thought was so cool is that you really seem to understand Latter-day Saint struggles. You seem to really you seem to get it. So how do you come by this? And when I say Latter-day Saints, I mean anyone who could possibly come under the term of refugee status, the traumatized Mormons. You understand what that's like. How did you get that knowledge?
Honestly, I think that it's actually all thanks to the people who fall under that umbrella and their willingness to share their stories with me. So when I first started working with Carla, she had been doing the work she was doing in Utah for, I think, 4 years when I showed up. And so I really got to see how she modeled being a good listener and offering ministry as being a listening ear. And so it's really this back and forth dynamic, this relationship of being willing to listen, but also having people who are willing to share their stories. And so because people are willing to share their stories, even though I haven't personally experienced the faith transition or the faith struggles that other individuals have, I've really gotten to learn what it's like from them. And so I'm really grateful that people were willing to share their experience.
And what's so fascinating, I think, that the community of Christ don't, well, certainly you don't, absolutely, but and generally, I've never met anyone who projects, who advises, oh, here's what you should do, or this would make you feel better. As a people, when Latter-day Saints have a sense of seeking something, if they are seeking ministry, or if there is that sort of faith transition thing going on, it actually makes a really vulnerable group. And so community of Christ have this sort of dynamic of, it would be so easy to provide all of the answers, especially when that's something that is being craved. You know, certainty is needed in these times of crisis. And community of Christ seem to hold back from doing that and just listen. And I'll be honest, I have something, I mean, it's good, but oh my goodness, you guys, I have had to do my own work, and I am unhappy. I would like things to be handed to me on a plate. What I want to do as we get into this discussion is to bring Sarah in for a moment. And I think you guys will see, our audience will see where I want to go with this as you share this experience. Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about your day? What would you like to say?
Right, I'm going to share about today, but I don't know why Jane wants me to do this. So Jane has a master plan here, because how I spent my day today was I drove down to a little village, a place called Simmons Yard. It's a particularly beautiful spot on the border of Wales and England, to visit my granddaughter and great-granddaughter. And my great-granddaughter's 5. So they were having a lovely day, and she was taking part in a Maypole festival. And Maypole festival in England is a huge, great big tradition. It's a pagan festival that celebrates the end of winter and heralds in the start of summer. And the Maypole dancing, there's this great big huge pole that's about the height of a flagpole with multicolored ribbons coming off it, and everybody has a ribbon, and they're all dancing around it and weaving patterns as they go. And it was quite something, because these kids are all between the ages of 5 and 11, and it was really good. So watching them dance their little hearts out, and I did have a word before, and I said, look, sweetheart, I said, you need to dance your heart out today, because we really need summer in this country, and this pagan festival is meant to bring summer, so just dance your heart out and get summer here, because we need it. And so she's doing this, and then they celebrated, because in the sort of tradition of it is there would be bonfires and a literal fight to put out the bonfires of winter and to herald in the new birth and the fertility of summer and everything that brought. So how they celebrated that, because they couldn't exactly give these kids bonfires and 6 on fire, they just emptied buckets of plastic balls into the middle of the field, and the two sides, the side that were dressed as winter and the side that were dressed as summer, had this huge war with these balls flying backwards and forwards. And at the same time there was a priestess and a priest for each side, 2 priestesses that were having a battle with sticks to fight out whether winter or summer was going to win. And in the end, winter died. So all the winter kids lay down on the field and died. And summer took over, and summer got up and danced another dance around the maypole, like, hey, here we are, we're here, summer has arrived. Winter is gone, winter is put to sleep, and summer has arrived. And that was how I spent my day. And a very traditional English summer fete, where there's all these activities and things going on, and kids acting out the pagan festival of Maypole. And I'm just leaving this for Jane now, because I don't know. I told Jane this earlier, and she's like, you need to share that tonight. So
I'm going to
take it away, Jane.
hear this. Yeah, well, because not only is that is really cool. There is a community celebration, so it wasn't just a school activity. There is a whole community involved in that. It's a holiday here when so there is the time off work and the community commitment to a space. So I have one of my children has autism. Well, two of my children have autism, but one, has very, very clear structural needs, and he needs to know when something is finishing and something is beginning. But he finds that really scary and really difficult, and so will worry about something coming to an end. And so what we need to do, there needs to be a clarity of when something has finished and something new is happening, but also it has to happen very gently for him. Now, I guess this was a big long segue, so I could talk more about me. This is so that I can have free therapy, right? This was the whole plan. But I've been hanging around. Sarah and I have both been hanging around the community of Christ space for such a long time. We've been part of, and we've been attending worships. We socialize. Some of our very best friends are in that space, and at some point last year, I had made the decision. I'd known it was coming for a while, but that I had been called away from this space and called towards a new space. And it was very much about looking forward and not running from something, not that there had been, it was just that kind of transition, the nice gentle transition, where at some point we will notice that things are different, but it's been happening so gradually that we can feel quite comfortable about it. And then there is also the need for us to, I think, recognize that there is a grieving that can happen. There is that a change has happened. And so a few weeks ago, when I had felt it was important to formally resign from from being a Latter-day Saint. Before I wasn't caring. I was too busy thinking about the future. But where my values came into conflict with what I felt like my identity was, I felt like, that as Sarah is describing this war between winter and spring being played out by children, I felt like, oh, that's our story. This is the story of how we move on and find what tomorrow looks like, because tomorrow can feel really fine if it looks exactly like today and looks exactly like all the other days previously. And so calling this Fearless for Tomorrow means that I guess we need to talk a little bit about the discomfort or maybe the tensions around, well, is everything going to change? Does that mean, is this a scary time for us? So with that in mind, Sarah, you had told me earlier on, you actually wanted to kick off with a question. Do you think we could do that? Because I think this actually...
Yeah, let's kick off with that.
Yeah,
let's kick off with that question. I wanted to ask each of you if you'd respond to this. And Joelle, if you can respond as invitational minister first, that would be great. Your Doctrine and Covenants, section 161, talks about counsel, and it talks about counsels that have provided instruction from the past are still applicable in principle today, but that you should not be captive to time-bound formulas. So the same principles apply that have always stood the test of time and apply, but you shouldn't be bound and captive to time-bound formulas. So what does that mean to you as an invitational minister and how you're moving your work and your role forward to the future? And the same for you, Carla, in a moment.
So immediately as you were talking, I was thinking about a hymn that we have in Community of Christ. And it's not that I don't like the hymn. It's just, it's not one that resonates with me that deeply. And I only share that because there are tons of people, specifically in older generations, who it really resonates with. And it's a very important part of their story. In fact, oftentimes they ask I was just at a funeral, and the gentleman who had passed away asked that we sang this hymn at his funeral. And the hymn is something like, "The Lord has yet more light and truth to break forth from God's word." And I can't help but wonder if the reason why that's so impactful to some of the older generations in Community of Christ is because they were really the ones that had to wrestle with coming out of this time of being, we are the one true church. This is our history. This is how we know it to be. They had to come out of that and kind of go into what you were talking about, Jane, with that uncertainty of today doesn't look like yesterday looked. And so really relying on that idea of, this is uncertain. This is scary. This isn't like yesterday, but God has more to share with us that maybe we weren't ready for yesterday, or maybe we weren't paying attention to yesterday. And so to me, as an invitation minister, that's really what I'm inviting people to, is that ongoing relationship with God that, respects the past and recognizes the foundations of the past and the important work that people that came before us did, doesn't diminish that in any way, but also says God is not static. God is not just in that past. God is still journeying with us today, and you are invited along on the journey as well. And so as an invitation minister, to me, I think it allows me to respond to people who, all of us, and in the world that we live in now, we are all faced with so much uncertainty. And it allows me to respond to people who are wrestling with uncertainty and say, I don't have answers. I don't have the exact what comes next, but I do know that God has been faithful and with us along our journey. And we've made mistakes. We've gotten things wrong. But as we continue to listen, as we continue to walk down this path, we'll be amazed by where we go.
Love that. Thank you. Carla.
I love section 161. I love that you brought that out. So what it says to me is that God has this glorious and amazing diversity. And the way that people think about that diversity and respond to that diversity is, of course, different. And the way that people can understand who God is different. The way I understand who God is definitely not the way that even my next door neighbor understands who God is, or that Joelle or Jane or Sarah, how you understand God is not how I understand God. And I think as ministers in Community of Christ and as members and friends of Community of Christ, one of our jobs is not only to listen carefully, but to respond in a way that is helpful to the people that we are talking to. And if that means we have to try and help people understand God in a different way, or understand our sacraments in a different way, then that's what we do. And there's no just one way to describe everything. If there was just one way to describe everything, that would be intensely boring. And I wouldn't like it at all. As a teacher, a former teacher, I love to have different ways to talk about things and show things and act things out and so on and so forth. So I think that incredible diversity is such a gift from God, because it lets me be creative in how I talk about God. It lets people be creative in how they experience God. And we can't say you're wrong and I'm right because you don't understand the way I do. What we can say is, I want to learn from you because you understand God and see God in a different way. So I actually really love that.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I love those responses. And I think it's that draws me to Community of Christ. It's that being able to explore and have a different relationship and think about things differently. And it doesn't have to be something you know today is what you know for the next 50 years. That it can be, I know something today. I mean, the only thing I know with any certainty is what I know today is not what I'm going to know next week. That's about the only thing with any certainty. And just 30 seconds, because I don't know whether you kind of even know where I'm at, Carla. I think Joelle might have picked stuff up from Sunstone last year, but I'm still sort of actively engaged in the LDS Church, but that's a bit. I have a role. I'm still a member of the LDS Church. I'm extremely nuanced and dissident and probably a thorn in the side to the LDS Church. But the fact is, I still feel called to be there at this moment in time. But that is for very specific work that we're doing around safeguarding. And I actually feel that that is something, a ministry that I'm actually meant to be doing at the moment. But it's really interesting navigating a church where I've sort of can quite confidently say, well, no, so I don't actually believe that anymore. No, I don't live that anymore. No, I don't do that anymore because that's not part of my life. But yes, I am here and cope with it because I'm here. But I think it's that looking to be able to have that freedom to explore a relationship with God without being bound to all the things that have been in the past, that kind of adventure and that following God and where's it going to lead. I mean, your mission prayer, which I have to say has got Jane and I in rather a lot of trouble over the years, because your entire mission prayer was not solely, but your mission prayer was the final bit that pushed us over the edge into starting all the safeguarding work that we've done in the LDS Church that has actually caused us no end.
Which was, do you want to share what that was? What was the phrase in it?
God grant me the courage. God grant me the courage to, because we've been talking about it for a long time and we'd been thinking, and then we just suddenly looked at that and we thought, hang on a minute, this is really saying, have you got the courage to do what I'm telling you to do? I've been telling you to do this for a year now and you keep talking about it. Have you got the courage to do it? And we both kind of went, okay. And then we kind of thought, can community guys rewrite this mission prayer, please? It's caused us serious problems. But on a really serious note, that's what we love about it. That bit about, have you got the courage to take this next step into whatever things may be and however things may look, with not even knowing what that will be.
And I think it's important to underline at this point also that I mean, particularly Sarah, I think would be the ideal example. But this in no way is about a tension between two churches, and you know how we're experiencing two churches.
Not at all.
Because the support from Sarah's leadership are awesome. I mean, my leadership are great. Yeah, but I mean, yours are so cool. And you know, so we get to be in this place because we've been able to show that we can be here. We can enjoy the fruits of these experiences. It is important though that you know, we're thinking about what God has in mind for us in the future, what tomorrow might look like. I think in many ways it's about having the freedom for us to change, for us to be different. That if we have this, you know, if we imagine that God is looking for us to be a better person, to better understand exactly what God is saying right now, well, I'm still in the same place. I'm still trying to be, and I'm not really able to progress. If I have the ability to be the kind of me that can take risks and explore and ask questions, then I am going to fundamentally change and I'm going to understand God in these new and different ways. And so for both Sarah and I, we've asked friends of ours this question very clearly. So I would love to know how you both would answer it. But we know how much hurt and pain comes from many faith traditions. Many people around the world experience it. Is Community of Christ ready for all of us, for that kind of pain and that hurt that we inevitably bring with us?
That is such a great question. And I appreciate that you gave us a few questions beforehand to think about, because I'm really appreciative I get to think about this, because I will tell you, in the Salt Lake congregation and in Provo and in Logan, I sat with dozens of people as they just cried their eyes out in their deepest pain in leaving the LDS Church, and how difficult it really was to leave. A lot of healing is, and a lot of inner work is necessary when you leave a high demand religion like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and moving either to Community of Christ into another different denomination, we're not a high demand denomination in Community of Christ. And that can also be a little bit disconcerting as well, because you're like, well, if you're not going to tell me what I need to do in order for fill in the blank, salvation, whatever, if you're not going to tell me what to do, then how will I know what to do? So there's just, it probably feels like when you leave a high demand denomination, you're probably just falling and you're not sure where you're going to be caught and so on and so forth. And at some point, inevitably, with all those people that I was with, they were caught at some point. Some of them stuck around with Community of Christ. Some of them did not stick around with Community of Christ, and they found their place. Now, I will say, before I jump into your real question, that it is very, very difficult to leave a high demand religion. It is incredibly difficult. I know I'm preaching to the choir. I've never left a denomination. I've never left a religion for another one, but I know the amount of hurt and pain and inner work and tears on the pillow moments to leave. And so I always would suggest finding a great therapist, getting someone to talk to you about it, because while we in Community of Christ are very loving and very kind and want to help, we are not therapists. I want to listen as much as I can, but I want people to do help with that inner work. Now, of course, we can facilitate inner work in the congregation. We had like lots of people sit down and have chats. We had chats all the time about where people were at and how we could help more people, so on and so forth. But it just takes a lot of effort. And I walked with many people along that path, and I am so impressed and inspired by the people that I walked with, because it takes a lot of strength to do that. Now, your question was, is Community Christ ready for that? The answer is yes and no. We are an organization who could be stretched. And I will say that having seekers join us is stretching for us. It has brought in some new ideas and new ways of thinking that has been difficult at times, and it feels like there's some growing pains, but also has been wonderful. You know, it's really forced us to look at ourselves and like, well, who are we? Who are we really? What can we tell these wonderful people who are coming of who we are? And so we've done some of that work before, but it's really kind of made it real for us, made it practical. All of the work that we did with the enduring principles and the mission initiatives and our mission statement, people coming in and talking to us about that, like from the LDS Church, from other churches, has made it real for us. And although it hasn't always been easy, like I said, it's been a wonderful, incredible experience. I will say just one more thing. I know I've talked a lot.
No, it's great.
No.
But people, when they leave a church, like leaving the LDS Church, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I don't know if you'll agree with me, but they're rebels. They've kind of gone against the grain. They've said, nope, this is not for me, and I need to find where I am. And for us, that has been also a growing experience. We're not necessarily a church of rebels. We're not a church of rebellion. So, you know, like standing up against injustice, it's helped us learn more how to do that and what it means to actually do that. But it's been a growing experience for us, and I think one that we desperately needed.
And I think it's been incredibly helpful for my journey. It's been incredibly helped with Community of Christ, because I associate more with Community of Christ than I do the LDS Church, even though I hold a state calling and a position of responsibility and all the rest of it in the LDS Church. That's just because I do. But I don't actually. I spend more time with Community of Christ, and it's a really difficult tension because of the factors that are at play as to why I'm walking kind of both paths parallel with each other. And what you're saying is absolutely true. It's that right. People are falling. You can't give a definite, concrete answer, which at times is incredibly frustrating, because you're thinking, just tell me, just tell me what the answer is. And I think it's that letting people work that out for themselves is really important. But I think back to the point about you're picking up, on a really serious note, you're picking up a lot of people that have been really hurt, and really traumatized, and still are. And I think a lot of that gets played out for a long time wherever they find a home. Some of those traumas and fears and anxieties get played out all over the place. And I've often sort of joked with Jane and said, you know what, you can get the woman out of Mormonism, but you can't get the Mormonism out of the woman. And sometimes you kind of see those traits, people are pulling them across to wherever they go next on their faith journey. They're so taking bits of patriarchy that they've walked away from and rejected because they see it as so harmful and so damaging, but they still actually are living it and believe in it and think it's there. You know, it's really hard.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, I think, to be able to, it's one of the things that Community of Christ does really well is accepting people exactly where we're at. Now, I know it's almost become a cliche. People say this, but you know, we're not projecting what a healed spirituality should look like. That if you were in a particular, whichever faith tradition for however long, particularly a high demand one, that has become how you see the world and how you interact with the world and how you respond, particularly to challenges. And to sort of say suddenly we're going to be healed of that, and maybe we shouldn't be healed of that. You know, there are things that we are, that we become, and that's part of our story. But it does mean that, yeah, you're coming into a beautiful space that doesn't have that baggage. What are you thinking about that, Joelle, about is Community of Christ prepared for, you know, sort of, and we think about it in terms of refugees who have, you know, in political situations in the world, governments have to be really prepared for how they support a people who have been through emotional, financial, physical traumas. What happens? What kind of conversations do you guys have about how to prepare to support, and can you support refugees?
So Jane, now you're getting into my social work background. A huge part of my focus was on actual refugees. And so yes, the government's involved. You do have to be prepared and to make sure that you're meeting the needs of those folks. And so when we talk about it in the realm of spiritual refugees, I really want to uplift something that Carla said. And that was just the idea that we want to be everything that people need us to be. You know, when a visitor walks in our door, we just bend over backwards to try to be exactly what that person needs. But the reality is that none of us, even in community, even when there are lots of individuals in a community, that community can't meet all of the needs. And so doing things like looking for therapy outside of the faith community, I think, is really important. I will say the Community of Christ has done a lot of work to try to be ready for people who are seeking. And that's not just folks who are seeking from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's a broader sense. There are lots of people. I mean, I would consider myself a seeker, right? Like, we're all seeking on our faith journeys. And so we have done a lot of work to try to prepare for that. Things like learning more about backgrounds of other faith traditions in the areas that we are. So for example, yes, we learn a lot about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because of the shared history. But in other parts of the world, or in other parts of the United States, if there's a specific religion where you notice a lot of people are coming from that religion, doing the background work to learn about it, to kind of understand some of the things that people are dealing with. We've also, as Carla mentioned, really worked hard to clarify who we are rather than who we aren't. Because we spent a long time in our history telling other people who we weren't. And that's great for if you're just putting religions in categories, that's really helpful. But when you're actually trying to live into being something as a faith community, saying who you aren't doesn't help you do that. And so things like the enduring principles, having those to be able to articulate who we are as a faith community. And we've done a lot of work around that. We also have created specific resources for seeker families. Things like Project Zion Podcast and Community of Christ was not around before people started to seek. Other educational resources that we use, that have now just kind of become mainstream resources in Community of Christ were originally created with seekers in mind and with specific language and considerations for people who are seeking. So I guess in answer to your question, I would say that, yes, I think so. I think that we want to create a safe place for whoever needs us to be a safe place. But I think that we also have to say that with the understanding that we are all human and we're all just doing our best. And so, you know, even though we aren't leaving a high demand religion, we have our own backgrounds. We have our own traumas and things that inform the way that we interact with people. And so I think just that awareness is really important. And I'm going to do a horrible job of telling the story because I wasn't actually there for it. I heard this secondhand. But there was a group of young people in Community of Christ that I was talking with, and they had this opportunity to go and meet with the prophet president, Steve Veazey. And they were in his office and they were asking him some question. And essentially he said, you know, when I think about what we're doing in community, we're really just all walking each other home. And I think that comes from a famous song or a famous poem somewhere.
I love that.
I love that too. And that is what we're doing. We're all walking each other home and helping us to get to that safe place as best we can. And we're doing that in our humanness, and we make mistakes along the way. We might trip on the sidewalk as we journey along. But I'm still willing to try and walk people home, even if I don't get it right every time. So yes, I think we are ready, even if we're imperfect.
It interests me that you know, the phrase that Carla used, you know, we're not a church of rebels, and yet I think, certainly for Sarah and I, the rest of the Brit Avenger gang, we absolutely see Community of Christ as a church of rebels. Your very presence, you know, it's to be able to sort of say no boundaries, and here is what we believe this should look like. Here's what I believe this should look like, and so I think in many ways that's what draws us to you, because people can speak up in the church and speak out and share contradictory opinions. So I want to kind of get into that a little bit and just kind of frame that by sort of sharing that as I've been preparing for baptism and confirmation and what that looks like, I have been, you know, crowdsourcing a lot of information, and the first thing I'm, you know, looking for is, okay, so where online do I find out all of what does a baptism look like? Because it's very regimented in my previous experience. The person in authority will do it exactly like this, exactly like so, and this is what makes it valid. And the more I'm seeking answers about this, you know, what are the rules? It feels like, although I'm getting these wonderful answers that are so empowering, you have freedom. You can choose. There are many ways that you know, what is meaningful to you to figure out what this commitment to Jesus will look like. When I've been sort of seeking to do that, I found it, and I think I love what you guys are both saying about therapy. It is you're right. It is so important, and I want to re-emphasize that too. But we can find ourselves. What I have found is that I'm sort of, if I'm not getting, here is what the rule is, or this is what you can do. If someone isn't telling me how it's done, I kind of feel a bit rejected. And I'm looking for those, I think when you've experienced rejection from a community and because you wouldn't ask to be baptized as a Latter-day Saint, someone will ask you. And so if no one has asked, and no one did ask for a really long time, so is anyone going to say the words? Did they not want me? So I'm having he's like, can somebody just take charge? And no one will do that. And it is so good, but they will work with me to help me figure out those things. And so I guess Sarah and I have been in a place where I think consistently we keep looking for, what are the signs? Where are the rules? Who is really in charge? What are our boundaries? How far could, if we had to How far could we go?
Oh, when we've challenged things and sort of said, hey, hang on a minute. No, what? No, I don't agree with that in Community of Christ. So then we've been on the phone to each other hours thinking, oh dear, why can't we keep quiet? What have we gone and upset everybody now? Is that it now? Have we blown it? Are we going to get kicked out of another faith community? One's already rejected us. Is another one going to kick us out?
And so
You know,
then
because
when
we're
we
just,
ask the
it's
question,
weird.
the community are, and our friends are like, yeah, you asked a really good question. So this is what, we think. And yeah, you're allowed to think that. You're allowed to think that. So yeah, online, you see Community of Christ members with so many opinions. They hold you guys to account. They say what they want to say, and you guys respond quickly and effectively to it. So could you talk a little bit then about power and authority? Because I crave it, and yet I'm rejecting it. So yeah, what are you thinking? We go to Carla first.
Okay. Well, I mean, that is quite the question, actually. So my original thought, and after I saw this, was like, well, we're all in charge. We're prophetic people. We're a people with a prophet, not just Steve Veazey as current president prophet, Stacey Cram being the next president prophet. He doesn't hold it all, or she doesn't hold it all, but we're prophetic people. But I actually think you're asking a different question, and what I hear now is a different question. And I don't know exactly if this is an exciting answer or not, but the thing about it is, if you're really curious as to where are the boundaries and how far can I go, the advice that I would offer is just be in communication with your mission center president. Just be in communication with your apostle. They will be happy, thrilled even, to talk to you about where those boundaries are. And we don't have a ton of boundaries. We do have boundaries. We do have, say, rules for priesthood. We do have some things that are in a boundary, but we don't have a lot. And so that, if you're really curious about where those are, then the conversations with your, like I said, mission center president or apostle be the place to be. And, different congregations and different communities have different boundaries. Like what might be fine in the UK might not be fine in Utah or in Independence, and I'm not saying the hard and fast rules we play with them all loosey-goosey, but there are just different ways of being Community of Christ all over the world. And I actually think that's very thrilling that I can go to a place and I get to see the way they experience Community of Christ according to their culture. Like when I was in Africa and I got to see how they were Community of Christ in Africa. They certainly weren't the same as they were in small town Kansas, where I grew up. It was an eye-opening, awesome experience. In Madrid, Spain, it was different than in Australia. In the Philippines, it was different than Europe. It was so exciting to see how they all celebrated being Community of Christ as they are. And so they're, like I said, the boundaries, quote unquote, could be different in a lot of different places. And I have a feeling that the more you hang out with us and get to know us, you'll just naturally know where those exist.
Right. And I think that's where the question sort of originates, is the fear of, well, how we would find that out, and am I going to feel a sense of rejection or crossing a line? And actually, I think members and people who are supporting us are making it really clear. You just get to go and try. So Joelle, what do we do with this freedom that we haven't had before?
I'm so glad that you just asked that question, because I think that oftentimes when people hear that there are few rules and the boundaries are pretty wide, in our modern culture, that translates to, well, then I just do whatever I want. And, I get to decide exactly how I am going to engage in this community and things like that. But really, what I see in that freedom is an invitation to really stop and reflect on the decisions we're making and saying, okay, if I do this, how does that then impact my community? If I do this, how does that then impact the world that I hope to live in one day. And so, yes, there's a freedom in it, but it's a freedom that comes with a responsibility. And one of our enduring principles is make responsible choices. And there's a lot that goes along with that about, you know, we never judge somebody else's choice because we don't know what choices they really had. We don't know what options were available to at the time. So we don't judge somebody else's choice as responsible or not, but we hold ourselves to the standard of making responsible choices that are that communicate love to the people that we're in community with, and that help bring about the type of world that we claim to want to live in. So to me, that's what that freedom brings.
I love that. And I'm going to come to Sarah to ask a question. And just as you're going to do that, Sarah, we had this moment last week where Sarah and I were having a conversation, and it was around this, you know, sort of, why are we constantly looking for rules and authority and someone to tell me that I am worthy, someone to say, I want you to do this, or to be invited in, as if that hasn't been made clear enough, you know, and it really has been made clear. The idea that Sarah pointed out beautifully, because someone once told us that we weren't. Mm-hmm. And therefore, and I think this was the scariest thought, was that if these people are people who already think I'm worthy, then for the first time ever, I understand that Jesus finds me worthy, that God finds me worthy. And as much as I can know that up here, before, I had the freedom to be able to feel and experience that. Sarah, you have a question about worthiness?
I think it's been a big thing, because both Jane and I have lived through those experiences and still live through those experiences with the LDS Church, where it's made very clear that you are not worthy and you need to sort yourself out, and you are really heading for outer darkness if you don't change the way you're doing things, and lived with those kind of conversations and things on a very regular basis. And although Jane's escaping it now, don't Jane? but that's there, and it's real. And one of the things that I really found difficult when I first started hanging out with Community Christ, when I first really heard about Community Christ and started looking, one of the things that I was thinking, well, if you don't have worthiness interviews, how do you know whether somebody's worthy to have a calling or to hold the priesthood? How do you know that? Because you're not having a worthiness interview with them and asking all these horrible, probing, trauma-inducing questions and all the rest of it that lead you to have kind of Mormon hell nightmares and stuff like that. So how are you understanding that? And then I think as I kind of started to get an understanding of what that was like, and it took a really long time for me to start to get a little bit of an understanding about what that was like, I started to understand that actually we are our own authority. In so many ways, we are our own authority, and we need to look at how being our own authority enables us to move through this world in a way that is centered on justice, is centered on Christ and Christ's mission, but being our own authority without somebody telling us what we can do, what we can think, what we can feel, what is okay, what isn't okay. So there's a lot about developing that ability to trust yourself again, to trust your instincts again, because the conditioning is real. The conditioning is real. And moving away from that conditioning and being able to trust yourself is really important, and being your own authority. So how do you, with the future, being that we're talking about the future being sort of fearless and bright and fabulous for Community of Christ as things move forward, how do you see that, if that's embraced throughout the community of Christ universally, and people really truly believe they are their own authority and they are worthy, how much do you see that blessing the ministry you can offer the world?
Carla, I'll take the first answer this time. I'm sorry, I've pointed it to you every time. So I think the first thing I would say is that in Community of Christ, worth is never in question. We have an enduring principle that is worth of all persons, and nothing changes that. Nothing that I say or do impacts my worth in the eyes of God. And so I think that that's a really empowering thing, because when we're not in kind of a transactional relationship with God and with our communities of, oh, if I do this, I will be more worthy, I think we're then empowered with, I am worthy. How am I going to live out in the world and interact with the world in a way that reflects that love and that worth? And how do I help other people in the world experience that same feeling as well? Because I think that there are a lot of people in the world, whether they're from, whether it's from a religious source or another source, I think there are a lot of people in the world that are told that they are not worthy for one reason or another. And so I think that knowing that all people are of inestimable worth then is something that I have to share with other people so that they know that they are worthy too. And so I think that for us, that worthiness kind of being a part of the whole community means that when we do make decisions, and I think, Sarah, you said it as like, we're the authority on the decisions that we make. We again have to make those decisions in a way that uphold our own worthiness and uphold the worthiness of others. And so in Community of Christ, we have something called common consent, which I think I've heard that phrase from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as well. But it's something that we've really been working on the last few years. What does that actually mean to have common consent? And it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody agrees, but it means that when we're making decisions, we look around and we try to hear from everybody. And so I don't remember exactly how you phrased the question, but you said something about like, what does that understanding add to your ministry? And I think that just that opportunity to hear from other people and to make sure that multiple voices are heard and multiple people are at the table really enhances what we can do, because I'm not just making it from my, I was born in the Midwest, I live on the East Coast of the United States. That is what my worldview, right? That's how I can see the world. But it's enhanced by the perspective of other people coming in who I also recognize have worth and whose voice should be in this conversation. And when all of those voices are present, I think that we can get a more complete, still not perfect, but a more complete understanding of who God is calling us to be.
And I can definitely say that's something that both Sarah and I have been able to experience, sort of the longer we've hung out with our friends in Community of Christ, when things are happening. So, for example, earlier this year, sort of an online discussion about, the UK, we're going to talk about some financial decisions that we're making, and we want to make sure there was opportunity for congregations to be part of that experience. And if you couldn't be there, opportunities to reach out digitally to be part of that experience. And Sarah and I are kind of thinking, do you think we could just go and watch and just like see how they rub their common consent in our faces? And we were joking about this. And because we always have a lot to say,
one of our Brit Venture friends put it brilliantly in a presentation he did at Sunstone, and he was talking about this common consent, and he said, and we were talking about Community of Christ and the Brighamite tradition from which we wander. And he turned around, he said, you know what? He said, it's like they're the Belgians. He said, and we're the North Koreans. He said, this is really what it is. He said, you've got Community of Christ, they're the Belgians. He said, we're cardigans and Bambi and doing brilliant. He said, and we're like the North Koreans over here, he said. And that was his description of the common consent of the two churches, which was absolutely superb.
And as an active member, he was very much, sort of sharing his own experience. But I think what I really wanted to emphasize was that as non-members, we felt very much involved, not only in contributing in those decisions, that our views were very much being sought, but that in our position as non-members, that they were being valued and they were being heard. And
I think that has astounded me, absolutely astounded me, that as a non-member of Community of Christ, I have actually done kind of things in meetings and kind of done a worship and a ministry and things like that. And I'm like thinking, what, you mean I can do that? And you kind of trust me to do that? And you don't have to ask 500 questions about whether I had a cup of coffee today? And oh, okay. And it's been absolutely amazing to know that that's been okay. And the other thing that's been, which I've only thought about since we've been talking in this last 2 minutes, is with Jane's baptism going ahead and all the rest of it, which is incredibly exciting, and it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be memorable. It really is. But what has amazed me is the amount of me being involved in that discussion. It hasn't been a case of, well, this is Jane's baptism, so can you go away because you're not getting baptized. It's kind of every time there's been a meeting about Jane to talk about it, it's kind of, they've said, hey, come on, because you need to be there as well. And that's been like really, which I hadn't just thought about now. But it's that kind of inclusion, and that you don't have to be a fully signed up paid member of Community of Christ to be actively involved in supporting ministry or supporting work or supporting what's happening.
Absolutely. Carla,
and I still don't understand that. I'm still not sure I totally understand that, but I kind of live it and see it.
Is us getting our heads around this stuff. This is why we were so excited to have this conversation, because we are literally, like you were saying, my mind is blown again today because we've just heard something else about how the confirmation works. Carla, what are your thoughts in response to Sarah's question about worthiness in ministry?
Well, as always, I love Joelle's answer, and I really want to emphasize more of what she said. So, like Joelle, I have never even questioned my worthiness. Like, I don't even think I ever used the word worthy in response to a church until I moved to Utah. Like, I never questioned it. When I was a child and I wanted to speak in a business meeting, the business meeting stopped and they listened to me just like they would listen to an adult. Like, my voice was always wanted. My voice was always necessary as a part of the community, even when I was 8 years old, 9 years old, even before I was baptized in Community of Christ. If I wanted to say something, then it was listened to. And so there's never been a question in my mind whether or not I was worthy. So the idea of not being worthy has also not crossed my mind. But I want to emphasize something that Joelle said about responsibility. And when all voices are equal, all voices are equal. I remember a moment in World Conference, probably in 2019, and one of our African members, I don't know what country he was from, he got up and he said something that was, for me, shocking. It was something that I never would have said on the conference floor. It went against everything that I believed in and thought was what we stood for. But we listened to him and we recognize that that is his context. That's where he comes from. Just like when I get up to speak, that is where I come from. And we keep talking about common consent. And common consent is wonderful, but it is also incredibly frustrating. Like, it takes a long time to listen to everyone, to make sure everybody knows that they have worth, to make sure everybody knows that their voice is important. And it is at times deeply annoying. I don't want to say annoying. That's probably too hard. That's probably too harsh. But it's like, come on, can't we just get to it? But what's important is having Sarah talk about, see what you want to do for Jane's baptism, like making sure people know they're part of the conversation. Sarah, I know you're not annoying. I'm positive you're not. But we're kind of talking about two different things here. We're talking about, getting to a decision and like at World Conference, which is just incredibly hard. Joelle, you wanted to say something.
Well, we could be talking about different scenarios here, but I think if I remember correctly, that World Conference, not only did we all listen to something that was upsetting to those of us from certain contexts, but then we had leadership in the church, Stacey Cram, get up and kind of remind us of the values and the things that we'd agreed to as a community, the shared understandings that we had, that kind of reframed what that gentleman had said and said, okay, yes, you might believe this in your context, but remember, we say this about worth of all persons, or we say this about responsible choices. So remember, when you're speaking, when you're sharing with the community, we want to hear what you have to say, but we also have to remember that there are some shared values that should underlie what we profess as a community.
Absolutely. And I just want to draw attention to, thank you in the comments for the, for what is being shared. I absolutely hear you. And yeah, it's great that we're in the same place together. So I feel where you're at. So I guess this moves me on to the UK. Now, I'm super conscious that we are asking two people who are not from the UK about what you're thinking about the UK, because we were talking sort of globally. And I think to maybe give a little bit of context to where we're moving to, we know that this is a really exciting time for Community of Christ, but we also know, and we've had, John Hamer has been on the show before and has shared some of the historical context. We've had Richard Barrington on the show before and talk a little bit about context. Community of Christ has always been on the verge of something exciting, and it's just sort of transitioned through, constant change in fascinating ways, and some of those things have been painful, and some of those things have been really smooth, and it's just wonderful to see that modeled. I think it's an example of a really healthy organization. Now in the UK, there is no formal congregation in Scotland, where we are here. So creatively, way even before COVID, already needs were being answered about, questions were being asked about, well, could we have a sacrament online? Can these things happen? And it was part of a worldwide conversation. And so very quickly, we were able to sort of build a really good online community. And it was wonderful to sort of see how all of that came about to address a need. As we see needs being met in digital ways, and through, sacred places, the congregations that are around the country, Dunfield in Wales, which is an incredibly sacred space. And we know that there's gatherings and camps and all of these opportunities for congregational worship. I'm very conscious that in a country that doesn't yet have a sort of presence, we have to be ministered to by people in other countries, and who do it, who are excited to do it, who are committed to supporting what's happening here. We're in a place where, that we don't have many models. We haven't really seen how it's being done. And so the needs of the community here, obviously, I am here and I'm here to see how this is gonna turn out. But we have quite a few young people here, young people particularly from the transgender community, particularly from the LGBTQ community, and we have some older people here too. And it's going to be really exciting to sort of see how a gathering event like a baptism, which is actually going to be 2 baptisms because my kiddo is going to be baptized on that day too. We're conscious that this congregation is going to grow to meet needs. Now, this is such a broad question. In a position like this, where something hasn't been done in a formal way since the 1800s, since missionaries were first in the United Kingdom and coming to visit Scotland, what could the future look like for the church in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, and then around the world? What is the vision? What would you sort of tell people who are here, who are listening, who are excited to find out, I don't really know much about this organization. I don't know what to expect. We don't have a congregation that we can just pop along to see how this looks and feels. We're kind of in many ways starting from the beginning, but with lots and lots of support. So what is the vision for Community of Christ? What does tomorrow look like? Carla, do you wanna go first?
For sure. For Community of Christ, we call ourselves a peace church, and we are a peace church. And the word peace for us is really all encompassing. It can mean no war. It can mean justice for people who are marginalized, or justice for people who need justice. It can also mean that shalom, the peace that comes from holistic, from being holistic, from the peace that comes within ourselves, the interpersonal peace, the peace between people. We have this something I don't know if you've heard of called the Peace Pavilion in Independence, next to the temple. That's about a block away from the temple, and there are 4 parts to the Peace Pavilion. It's peace for me, where you get to think about the peace within yourself. Peace for us, which means that interconnected peace between people. Peace for the planet, which means, the sacredness of creation. And peace for everyone, which means peace for all the peoples of the world, for everybody. And and that's what we teach our children when they go to the Peace Pavilion. And we have schools from all over the Kansas City area who visit the Peace Pavilion and who learn about those kinds of things. For me, I think the number one most important thing we can do is teach that peace. Mother Teresa once said, if we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And so if we could teach that community, that beautiful kind of community, that beautiful kind of peace that that a lot of us have found in Community of Christ, if we could live that kind of community in a much broader way, in a bigger sense, remembering that we belong to each other, remembering that we are connected by family, by community, by whatever, that's, I think, the most important thing we can do. And so, it sounds a little bit Pollyanna, if that translates into the UK. I don't know if that translates or not. It sounds a little pie in the sky, but that's my hope for the future, that we can live out community, and we can live out these bionic communities and show how wonderful it could really be if people live in this way. What is Dunfield's motto? How good the world can be. And so, if we could all live in that community, we could show the world what a beautiful, incredible place it could be.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, I love that.
Joelle, you got to meet a lot of the UK people last year, and my kiddo, who's been baptized along with me, you got to meet them. You know how much peace and justice that work is something that people in the UK, I think, particularly connect with. So what would you say, having been here and having experienced it, what do you think about the future might look like for tomorrow here?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say, Carla, so much of what you said resonated with me, because I agree. I think that is where we as a faith community are being called to go. I was about to say where we're headed, but it's more than that. It's where we are being called to go. It's what we are being called to become. So Jane, you mentioned that I got to spend some time in the UK last year. And I will say that none of the things that I did while I was in the UK, none of the events that I attended or the experiences that I was a part of, and I'm trying to make sure that this is true, I'm pretty sure it is, none of them were a traditional worship service. It took so many different forms. We had a house church where we ate soup and bread together. We had a children's program where we made bird feeders and played together. And so none of the things took the form of a traditional, what we'd expect a church service to look like. But I think that when you have an inclusive understanding of God and hold on to a focus on Jesus, you begin to realize that everything is holy. And instead of thinking that your gathering needs to be structured or ordered in a certain way in order for God to be present, you begin to look at how God is already present in everyday experience, regardless of the form that it takes. And so I think that is specifically true, based on my encounters in the UK. It's a lot of small groups, right? It's pockets of people, and they're far away from each other. And so I think that when we really lean into that idea that everything is holy, and every time that we gather together as a community with the intention for seeing how God is present and looking for who we are called to be, those can be meaningful and transformational experiences, even if they don't check all the boxes of church. And I think that they inevitably lead to some of that peace work that we've been talking about, to that search for peace and justice. And when I was in the UK, I got to see people doing different avenues of that. So I hung out with Andrew Bolton and got to see a lot of the work that he does around Middle East peace. I met with Andrew Fellows, I believe was his last name, and got to see the climate peace that he works for. And so it takes all of these different forms. It's sustained by community members who have this common desire for peace, but then it's lived out in different ways in communities in very tangible ways.
In the spirit of Community of Christ's shared values, Sarah, what do you think tomorrow could look like for Community of Christ?
I remember sharing some time ago at Dunfield. And I went to summer camp at Dunfield. It was a fantastic experience. And I remember sharing that one of the things that I felt was that you have got something in Community of Christ that so many people need and so many people want. But I think not enough people know where to find it. And I think finding people that want Community of Christ and need Community of Christ and linking them up together is a challenge. Because I think if we can get the people that need what you've got in contact with you, then I think the building of community, the strengthening of people, whether they're a member of Community of Christ or not, the strengthening of people to contribute to justice in their local community, and to have those balcony supporters cheering them on and helping them to do things that are good and right, whether it is seen as all Community of Christ have done this, or whether you are there in the background making things happen. I think I see a huge role for social justice and peace with Community of Christ. I think that's the strength that I see Community of Christ bring it to the UK, and I can't speak for the rest of the world. I see it there, but I just see certainly in the UK, Community of Christ having the potential to bring about justice, to bring about fairer, more equal societies, more equal communities, and to actually maybe raise the voice a bit so that people actually know where to find you and know how to find Community of Christ. So the voice is kind of a little bit more heard. And I see that as being a real strong potential for the future.
I love that. We're going to come to closing comments in a minute because I want to hear what everyone says before we wrap up. But there's a few things in the chat that I just want to really quickly address. So if you want to know more about Community of Christ and how to connect, we do have someone who's in the chat tonight who can direct you, but you can find out more. If you want to come and check out our Facebook page, we'll have loads of links. We'll put them all in the show notes tonight. You can find Community of Christ online. There is so much information online about Community of Christ. And while there may not be a lot of in-person groups here in Europe, connections are very, very much made. There is a really good, strong community. So I would definitely suggest reaching out because you are needed and you are important. And it's really exciting to see people arriving in this space. Vivian also has asked, Vivian, I love you. I'm so glad that you're with us tonight, has asked who's going to baptize me. So just to quickly let you know, the plan is I'm going to be baptized in July, and on July 20th, and I'm putting this out there because you're all welcome. It's going to, because we have plenty of room, it's going to be happening in Loch Lomond. And if you want the specific area that we'll be in, just shoot us a message because we would love to have you with us. So we'll be in the Loch for the baptism, and in the shores of the loch after it, we're gonna barbecue some seafood and some burgers over a fire. We'll have some community singing, and I think we're going to do some fire spinning and things like that too. We're going to have a lot of fun. It's going to be very much a community experience. And I'm also aware that you know, like Vivian, you just mentioned, I know that we're very spread out here. Even in Scotland, if you live as far as 40 minutes away and you don't have transport, it's as bad as being, you know, 400 miles away without a way of getting here. I know how difficult it is to, as someone who is a carer for my son, getting outside and being with people can be really difficult to facilitate. And so I feel like that's what my ministry is going to look like, is kind of how to bring people together and how we can do that. So I'm really looking at how we can make sure that this is as accessible as possible, and because I want you all there, because you guys have been there for me. Okay, to finish up with some closing thoughts then, Joelle, let's come to you first. Do you want to share any final thoughts that are in your mind? And Joelle, I think, is muted for the moment. I tell you what, while we figure that out, let's come to Carla. If you wanna share your thoughts first.
Yes, I always have tons of thoughts to share. First of all, I want to say thanks so much for inviting me to be on this podcast. It has been super duper fun. Like I said earlier, I feel like I'm usually the one doing the interview, and I rarely am interviewed. So it's so nice that I get to talk about what I want to talk about. I just want to say I so wish I could be at your baptism, Jane, because it already sounds like a blast, and it sounds like exactly the kind of place I want to be. A place with lots of community, with lots of people, with singing, with food, with fun, and especially with the spirit there. I am really, really sad that I'm not going to be able to be there, but I will be with you in spirit. I'll be thinking about you on July 20th. You know, being a member of Community of Christ my whole life, I understand what you're saying about how a lot of people don't know who we are and how to join us. And like where some people have called us the best kept secret in the world. So I understand that. I love that we do podcasts like this so that more people can hear about who we are. And I know that we have a lot of work to do. We definitely have a lot of work to do. We are nowhere near perfect. We still have work to do when it comes to ourselves and, of course, our theology and so many other things. But I am so grateful that we are willing to do that work together. And it is not easy work. It's work that requires us being vulnerable and intentional and completely focused in on this work. So it can be hurtful and painful at times. I think in Doctrine and Covenants, I don't remember what section it is, but it talks about building community can be arduous at times. And that is true. And I'm always grateful for people who are willing to step into that work and be a part of the community that I love so much, and be willing to give of themselves in order to make this community the best it could possibly be. So I'm super grateful for the people who are listening to this podcast and feed. I'm super grateful to you, Sarah and Jane, for, being vulnerable tonight and saying those things that are on your hearts that are difficult to say. So thank you so much. I'm just grateful that for people doing the work and people willing to walk in community with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carla. Richard Barrington in the comments, you have not told me if you're going to come and confirm me yet. President Barrington.
Just call it out, Jane. Call the luck of his funds out, Jane. Go,
You're talking about boundaries, right? Was that one? Did I cross it? No, Richard.
What does you mean to go on?
Absolutely.
Richard, reply to your messages, mate.
Yes, we have a lot of fun with Richard. He knows
he does.
We'll fix him if he's misbehaving. Anyway,
but he doesn't. He knows we love him. He knows we love him, and he knows we can banter with him because we do love him.
Absolutely. Joelle, do you want to share your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I want to echo what Carla said about just gratitude. Thank you for having us on tonight and for being willing to listen and share with us. I too am a little upset that I'm not going to be able to make it to the baptism in July. That sounds amazing. And I'm so happy for you and your kiddo. And I'm not only happy for you all, I'm happy for our community. I think it's wonderful to have you be a part of it. I guess the only thing that I would say is just kind of echoing what Carla said earlier about the peace that we are about. It might sound pie in the sky, and it's easy to give it lip service. It's easy to talk about it all day long. But I think that the important thing isn't that we talk about peace. It's that we actually do the hard work of living it out in our daily lives. There will inevitably be conflict that arises, and we have to be willing to take tangible steps that move us closer to God's preferred future. Things will happen in our lives that naturally, like our instincts will flare up and will respond the way society has always taught us to respond. And often those ways aren't peaceful. And so instead of defaulting to those responses, we need to actively and intentionally pursue peace. And the reason that I'm saying this is kind of my closing thought is because I recognize that there is a diverse group of people on listening tonight. And I just want to share that invitation with all of them, because you don't have to be part of a specific denomination. You don't have to profess a certain set of beliefs. All of us can be working together towards that shared goal of bringing peace and justice in the world. And so, again, I'm so incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to share with everybody tonight. And I just want to invite us all to be more intentional and renew our commitment to being peacemakers in the world.
Thank you so much. Beautifully put. As Sarah and I, we bless your work and your ministry, and we're so thankful for it. We're thankful for the time that you've spent with us tonight. We also want to, just, I guess, kind of stress that that this work is about where God is leading you and what that looks like in your life just now. And our work in 21st Century Saints will always look like working in this restoration space. And while Sarah's in the space that she's in, and I'm moving forward in new and exciting ways, we have had support across the whole spectrum of faith and people who don't affiliate with any faith, or who don't have a particular thing that they would call a formal faith. We've given church lawyers such a hard time in the Latter-day Saint community about how we expect you to do better. And some of the most powerful words in ministry I've received has been through, and if you're listening, you know who you are. Thank you so much, because your words were needed and were very important. Thank you. We are excited to help you continue to stay in the place that you are called to being, and hope that the conversations that we are going to have in the future will be of some value in how you experience that. So please stay in touch, take care of one another, and for all of you, we bless your journeys.